أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh everybody. I hope you guys are doing okay and welcome back again for one of the history lessons. Today is week 6. We have been talking about over the last 5 weeks the fall of Roman empires, birth of Islam, four rightly guided caliph, Umayyad and Abbasids. Today is week 6. We're going to shift our focus a little bit different group during the Middle Age, what was happening besides all over the last 5 weeks, whatever we have discussed. So today we will talk about Anglo-Saxon in England, Vikings, and Charlemagne's Empire. All right, let's begin. Before we start, like every week, we're going to take some words for tonight. Today is first word is Pope. Pope is head of the Roman Catholic Church, the largest Christian church in the world. Settle, to come to a new land and decide to live there for good. Raiders, who attacks and robs. Conquer, winning. These are some words that's going to help you to understand the context when I'm discussing today, inshallah. Okay. So Anglo-Saxon, this is a name of a group that around 400 years, this group came to Britain. Okay, let's discuss more. Who were Anglo-Saxons? Why did Anglo-Saxons invade Britain? And where did Anglo-Saxon come from? If you look at the map, the Anglo-Saxons left their homeland in northern Germany, Denmark, and Netherlands. Okay, so these three areas the Anglo-Saxons came from. They rowed across the North Sea and in wooden boats to Britain around year 400. Okay, so around the year 400, the tribes of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, they began arriving in Britain from Denmark, northern Germany, and Netherlands. These people were later known as Anglo-Saxon, and the land where they settled was called England, or now it is called England. By 600, England was divided into 7 kingdoms, each ruled by a warrior king. Okay, let's proceed next one. So thans, it means nobles, ceorls means farmers, and slaves mean slaves. So the Anglo-Saxon kings ruled over nobles called thans, farmers called ceorls, and slaves. Thans and ceorls were free, but they had to fight for their king. Slaves were owned by their masters. All right, so buried treasures. Some Anglo-Saxon kings were buried in ships surrounded by their treasures. Helmets and weapons and jewels, these have been found in the ship graves of Anglo-Saxon kings. So this is one kind of a helmet that was found in the ship grave East Anglia. So most Anglo-Saxons, they lived in a village, although some of the villages grew into small towns. The men worked in the fields and went out for hunting and fishing, and women cooked and made clothes and looked after the hens and pigs, and some villages were potters and blacksmiths and carpenters. If we look into the picture, we will see that a woman, these women, they're weaving and spinning the wools. If we look into here, this man is using a pole lathe to help him make a wooden bowl. He pushes a pedal to make the wood turn as he carves it. And also we see a blacksmith here. We see a shepherd, and also you will see wooden fence here, thatched roof. Houses are built from planks of wood. We see hen houses here. Also, we see a well. Here we see musicians and jugglers arrive from feast. Slaves roast a pig on a spit, and a fowler, like a bird catcher, probably bring birds for the feast. And woman is cooking And then they're making oven. I think it's an oven. They're baking some bread. So this is a typical Anglo-Saxon village portrait that we can think of now. Okay, so fighting with the Vikings or Danes. So what happened? Around 800, the Vikings began to invade England. By 874, they had conquered all the kingdom except Wessex. King Alfred were the king of Wessex that time, and finally King Alfred agreed that the Vikings could settle in eastern part of the country called Danelaw. 924, Alfred's grandson became king of all England, and 1013, Vikings invaded again. All right, so if we see to the next slide, Angle or England, okay, this is a typical picture, a map of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. I'm going to move to the next topic. So from pagan to Christianity. About 1400 years ago, the Pope in Rome sent a missionary to England to pursue the Anglo-Saxons to become Christians. So the timeline for Anglo-Saxon in a quick glimpse. So 410 to 520 AD, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, they settled in England. 600 AD, England divided into 7 kingdoms, and 1867 to 1874, the Vikings invaded England, and 871 to 899, Alfred is the king of Wessex. 924 to 939, Aethelstan ruled England, and 1013 to 1042, Vikings ruled England, and 1042 to 1066, Edward the Confessor is the king of the England, and 1066, William the Conqueror conquered the England. So I want you guys to remember, you don't have to remember exact timing, but at least have an idea that 400 to 500 that time, the Anglo-Saxons started coming to England, and they started invading England and started settling in England. 600 AD, that is the time that England is divided into 7 kingdoms. Because if you want to make a connection with Islamic history, that what was happening that time parallelly in Arabic Peninsula. So we know that 570, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born. So that is the time around that England was dividing into 7 kingdoms. And then when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away, the rightly guided Caliph passed away, and 662 and 600, that area, the England was ruled by Anglo-Saxons. It was divided into 7 kingdoms. All right, so if you look into that, until 750, we know that Umayyads are ruling Islamic Empire. So 750, at that point, some point, Vikings are invading England. And now King Alfred is the king that time when Abbasids are ruling in this time. And Vikings rule the England, and Edward the Confessor is the king of England. William the Conqueror conquer England. All right, next one. Before we get into the Vikings, I think that's all pretty much we have for Anglo-Saxons. We'll come back to that later on. So Vikings. So did you know that the Muslim traveler Ibn Fadlan wrote the earliest existing record of Vikings, and he was appointed by the Abbasids. In his journal, he mentioned Vikings as tall as palm tree. So if you recall our Abbasids episodes last week, so Abbasids were ruling from 752 until a long time. So when Vikings came to England, that time Abbasids were in power. So Vikings, whenever we hear about Vikings, in our brain or in our imagination, we always think about somebody, they have a horn in their helmets, they're bloodthirsty, they're raiders, and something like that, right? So that is the picture that we always think about. But in reality, all the Vikings were not all bloodthirsty raiders. Some came to fight, but others came to Britain to live peacefully. So let's learn about Vikings. So Vikings, where the Vikings come from? Did Vikings have a religion? What jobs did Vikings do? Did Vikings have a law? Where did Vikings live? What was Viking society like? Let's explore those. So the Vikings came from 3 countries in Scandinavia, in Northern Europe. So Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. These countries later on is called Scandinavian countries. So on the map you look, so the name probably means pirate. Okay, so and they were fierce raider and fighters. In their own lands, the Vikings were farmers, fishermen, and craft workers. Okay, all right. So next we move to the next topic. So the raid on Lindsfarne marks the start of Viking migration from Scandinavia in 793. So 750, we know that Umayyad Empire has fallen and it has been taken over by Abbasids. So that is the time when the Abbasids started ruling at the beginning. That's when the Vikings raid on Lindsfarne, okay, and that is the first time ever they migrated from Scandinavian countries. So to look into a little bit more into deep that we see from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, this is the area that Vikings has been spread out in different parts of the world. So the Vikings went to the Iceland, they went to even to the Newfoundland in Canada, they went to America, they went to Britain, they went to Ireland, they went to France, Spain nearby, also they went to Italy, Russia, and they also went to Baghdad and Arab traders, all these areas. So they have been going in there with their long ship everywhere. So Viking traders and explorers. So what did Viking trade? Which country they explored? So we have pretty much have an idea that which countries they have been exploring. And now the next one, what did the Viking trade? So Viking lived in a large homes. First, let's talk about their homes and their life a little bit, and then we will be able to a little bit have an idea. So they used to live in a large homes called long houses. I might have a picture of long houses here. So they used to live in these long houses. Each long house belonged to a chief, and all the families who worked for the chief ate and slept in this house. If you look into the house very carefully, we see that they have animals in their house. In the winter, some of the animals are kept inside. The man bringing wood for fire here. This boy looks after the pigs. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Let's start again. Sorry for the interruption. So this woman is weaving cloth at her loom, and we see the wall and the wall is hanging in here. There is a smoke hole, probably this one. The chief and his wife sleep in this bed. Looks like a fancy bed for them, and chest of storing the clothes and all these things. Okay, so what kind of religion they had? Like the type of religion in ancient Greece and Rome, Vikings worshipped many different gods and goddesses. Their religion was an important part of their everyday life. Okay, so the Vikings were great metal workers and carvers. They made elaborate weapons and necklace and beautiful carved objects. So they used to trade all those stuff. And their family life. How was their family life? Many of the Vikings were farmers. They grew crops and vegetables and kept cows and pigs and chickens and goats. They also hunted wild animals, just like regular medieval life style that we can see. Also, before I go into Viking, so what made Viking longship terrifying effective? We need to talk about that a little bit. Before that, let's talk about a little bit of their burial. Okay, so the Vikings buried people with food and treasures to take with them to the next life. Sometimes a great warrior was buried on a ship, which might be burned at ship or buried under a mount. So it was thought the ship went to Valhalla, a kind of heaven where only warriors could go. That was their belief system, that the people, they could go to Valhalla is kind of a heaven, okay? All right, so now that Vikings, they used to go for trading, as we were talking about, what did the Vikings trade? So Viking merchants traded in Europe and beyond, as we saw in this picture. Some adventurous trades even reached the Arab city of Baghdad, as we have seen here. The Vikings sold swords, fur, ivory. Ivory is kind of like a walrus tusks. In return, they bought silk and precious stones and carving and beautiful objects made from gold and silver. Okay, so settlers. So boatloads of Vikings settlers arrived in the newly discovered and conquered land. Okay, so the boatloads of Viking settlers arrived in newly discovered and conquered lands. In northern France, the Vikings were called Normans. We will talk about Normans more details in next week. So in Eastern Europe, they were known as the Rus. Okay, so they were known as red-headed people. The area where they lived became later known as Normandy and Russia. Some Vikings settled in Iceland and Greenland. If you see here, Iceland and Greenland. Others even went to live in Vinland. So Vinland is America, but Native Americans attacked their homes and they soon fled back to Greenland. Daring adventurers and traders sailed overseas and up rivers. When they could not sail any further, the crew carried their boat or dragged it on logs to the next river. Eric the Red explored Greenland. His son, Leif Erikson, went farther west and reached America. The land he found, called Vinland, was probably the modern Newfoundland. Alrighty. So now that we can see that actually Vikings were not only the raiders, even though around over 300 years, Vikings raiders terrorized the people of Europe. Ferocious warriors arrived, swift warships called longships. Then they fought their way inland, robbing towns and villages as they went. However, the raider invaded large areas in Britain, Ireland, France, and Italy. But later, some of them settled in these places. All right, so actually by 1100, the raids came to an end, and by the time many of the Vikings had become Christians, and their people were much violent by that time. All right, I think that's give you a little bit of idea about Vikings. I think we already discussed about Muslim historian Ibn Fadlan. He documented about Vikings. There are some videos in this today's lecture. I will post them in the description that you guys can see later on. Those gives a very visual idea about longships and other things about Vikings. And how did Vikings fight? Definitely this YouTube video shows brilliantly. So we will see that by 1100, the Vikings raid ended. Now, we have discussed about Anglo-Saxon as well. Now let's move to the Charlemagne's Empire. So who do you think Charlemagne was? And king who ruled the land we know today is France. So before I get into what is Axon and all these, let's give you a little bit quick idea that Charlemagne's Empire in 768, a young prince called Charles was crowned king of the Franks and inherited most of the land that is now France. For more about the Franks, he was a brilliant soldier, a keen Christian, and he became known as Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great. So he built his empire. So Charlemagne wanted to create a new Christian empire as large as the Roman Empire had been. For over 30 years, he fought for land and insisting that any non-Christians he conquered should join the church or Christmas Day. On Christmas Day, 800, the Pope crowned him as Emperor of the Roman. So let's talk about a little bit. So this is a city, Aachen, this is here. So it is a city where Charlemagne built a beautiful palace in the city. He encouraged the scholars and artists to come and work in Aachen. Sorry, Aachen, not Aachen. All right, so Charlemagne paid for churches and monasteries to be built all over his empire. He encouraged scholars, artists, and craft workers to come and work in Aachen, where he had his palace. Okay, so Charlemagne's empire actually did not last so long after his death. By 843, the empire had split into three kingdoms, and each kingdom was ruled by a member of Charlemagne's family, and the three rulers fought against each other, and their kingdom became very weak. I think that's all we have for Charlemagne's. A little bit. There's also another beautiful video about some important dates about Charlemagne. So 768, the Charlemagne became the king of France. So that time, Abbasids had taken over from Muslim Empire, and 773, 804, Charlemagne built up his empire. 800 to 814, Charlemagne is an empire. 843, Charlemagne's empire split into three kingdoms. So did you know that Charlemagne set up a huge army of soldiers to conquer Muslim Spain and add it to the Christian Empire? Who was the empire of the ruler in Spain that time? Do you remember that during the time of Umayyad, time of Umayyad, when Abbasids took over, and then Abbasid invited all the Umayyad princes, almost 50 princes, to have a dinner. They wanted to offer a peace treaty, but that was a lie. They actually killed all the Umayyad prince. So one of the Umayyad prince, Abdurrahman, he was able to escape and he went to Spain. Actually, he went to Spain and established empire, Umayyad dynasty. So he was the empire that time when Charlemagne set up a huge army of soldiers to conquer Muslim Spain, but Abdurrahman's soldier was so strong that he then left. He actually left the idea of winning over Spain that time. So that's all for today. Hopefully we will come back about more lessons next week. Take care and thank you so much for listening.